Have you ever scrolled through someone's life and felt like you were already losing? Watching someone your age buy a house, get the promotion, start the business, while you're still figuring things out? You start to believe you're behind. But what if the person you're comparing yourself to is simply further into their race, not better at running it? Today's story takes us to a small village where one race, one single afternoon, taught everyone watching a lesson about patience they would never forget. Stay with me until the end, because the way this race actually ended will change how you look at your own pace forever. And if stories like this speak to you, take a moment to subscribe, because we're about to begin. Once, in a village nestled between green hills, there was an old tradition. Every year, when the harvest was done, the village held a race. Not for money, not for glory, but because the elders believed a race revealed something true about a person's character. That year, two young men stood at the starting line. The first was Devon, tall, strong, and known throughout the village for his speed. He had won informal races since childhood. People already spoke of him as the winner before the race had even begun. The second was Amos. Quieter, leaner, someone few people paid attention to. He had never won anything. He simply showed up every year and ran his own race. When the signal was given, Devon tore off down the path like an arrow loosed from a bow. Within moments, he had a lead so large that the crowd began cheering his name before he'd even reached the halfway mark. "It's over already," someone laughed. "Amos doesn't stand a chance." Amos ran too, but at a steady, unremarkable pace. He didn't sprint, he didn't strain. He simply moved forward, one stride at a time, his breathing even, his eyes fixed on the road ahead rather than on Devon's shrinking figure in the distance. The villagers lining the path began to whisper. Some pointed at Devon with pride. Others glanced at Amos and shook their heads. "Why even bother running if you're going to fall behind like that?" a young boy said to his mother. She didn't answer. She only watched Amos's steady form move past, unaffected by the whispers around him. Devon, meanwhile, was flying. He pushed harder, wanting to make his lead impossible to ever close. But nobody tells you that running your fastest at the very start means you have nothing left when the real test arrives. By the time he reached the long hill near the village well, halfway through the course, his legs had begun to burn. His breathing turned ragged. The applause from earlier had faded into the distance behind him. And now, alone on the hill, there was no one to cheer, only his own body beginning to protest. If you're still watching, ask yourself something. How many times have you looked at someone sprinting ahead in life and assumed the race was already decided? Amos reached the hill much later than Devon had. But where Devon had burned through his strength climbing it too fast, Amos climbed it the same way he'd run everything else, steady, controlled, unhurried. He didn't know exactly where Devon was anymore. He couldn't see him ahead. But he wasn't running against Devon. He was running his own race, at his own pace, the only way he knew how. Near the top of the hill, something happened that stunned the few villagers who had walked ahead to watch from higher ground. Devon, who only minutes before had seemed unstoppable, stumbled. His legs, spent from the effort of his early sprint, gave out beneath him. He sat down at the side of the path, chest heaving, unable to continue at the pace he'd started with. He wasn't injured. He was simply completely spent. Amos came up the hill behind him, still moving at that same unhurried rhythm. He didn't gloat. He didn't slow to look at Devon. He simply kept placing one foot in front of the other, the way he had from the very first step. By the time the finish line came into view, word had already begun to spread through the village that something unexpected was happening. The crowd that had gathered to celebrate Devon's certain victory now stood in confused silence. And when Amos crossed the finish line first, steady breath, calm eyes, no one quite knew what to say. Devon crossed sometime later, walking now instead of running, his early lead meaning nothing on a course that demanded more than a fast start. That evening, the village elder gathered everyone together, as was tradition. He looked at the crowd and said, "Every year, some of you cheer for whoever is ahead in the first mile. But a race is not won in the first mile. It is won by whoever keeps moving when the applause stops." He turned to Amos. "You did not run to impress anyone at the start. You ran to finish. That is why you finished first." Then he turned to Devon, who sat with his head lowered. "There is no shame in starting fast. The shame is in believing the beginning decides the end." The elder's words spread through the village long after that race was over. People began to understand something they had never fully considered before, that watching someone else's chapter 1 and comparing it to your chapter 15 tells you nothing true about either life. Maybe that's exactly where you are right now, watching someone else's highlight reel and quietly deciding your own race is already lost. But you don't know what hill they're about to hit. You don't know how much they emptied out in that first mile just to look impressive early. And more importantly, you don't know what's still left in you, because you haven't finished your race yet. Your pace is not a flaw. Slow and steady was never a consolation prize. It was the actual strategy all along. The people who build something lasting are rarely the ones who started the fastest. They're the ones who were still moving when everyone else had already sat down. So tell me, honestly, in the comments below, have you ever compared your beginning to someone else's middle and quietly convinced yourself you were behind? What race are you still running, at your own pace, even when no one is cheering for you right now? If this story reminded you to trust your own timing, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And remember, nobody remembers who led the first mile. They remember who finished the race. I'll see you in the next story.